Hello and welcome. Welcome to our latest CyNam Tech Showcase event. My name is Chris Dunning-Walton. I'm one of the directors here at CyNam. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you this afternoon, where we're going to be exploring the topic of critical national infrastructure. And today's purpose is to give you some insight from some fantastic companies that are working in the C&I space, and how their models can help us plan and prepare effectively against CNI related attacks. So I'm very happy to welcome three fantastic companies: Wembley Partners, Configured Things, and Titania. Thank you so much for joining us. First up today, we have Wembley Partners, and it's my pleasure to welcome Ellie Upson, who's the Director of Operations at Wembley Partners. They are a bespoke cybersecurity services and products firm with offices in the USA, UK, and Canada. And they're going to be talking about their cyber risk platform and their managed secure service assessment and testing products. They will also be giving a demo of their newest incident response product, Orna. So Ellie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's great to be here. So, as Chris said, my name's Ellie Upson, and I'm the Director of UK Operations at Wembley Partners. And we, as Chris mentioned, are a cyber security startup that set up in 2019. Prior to that, I've worked in cybersecurity for almost 10 years, primarily in security operations and looking at cyber threat intelligence and how that can be used to guide security operations. At Wembley Partners, we really advocate an intelligence-led approach to cybersecurity, and today I'm going to be talking about how we can use that approach to prepare for incident response, particularly using our SaaS platform, which we call Orna. So, there's been a wide range of critical national infrastructure attacks reported in the news, and they're things from power generation with the attacks through to attacks on the education system, leading to schools being shut down. And the consequences can be far-reaching, anything from poisoning a water supply to petrol stations being closed. And even in 2020, the German police launched a homicide investigation because a patient received delayed care as a result of a ransomware attack. So there's even criminal implications to these attacks. So, as we can see from these graphs on the screen, our cybersecurity spend has doubled in recent years between 2016 and 2021, and that shows that businesses are beginning to invest more heavily in cybersecurity. And yet, despite that investment, the cost of cybercrime has also doubled, and that's because threat actors are continuously innovating to find new ways that they can make a profit. So how does that reflect in the CNI space? Well, a recent study showed that the average cost of a cyber attack that impacted on OT or ICS systems is roughly $3 million. So it's no small financial implication. And so how can businesses be better prepared? Well, we see that in a 12-month period, a study showed that 86% of CNI organizations had an attack that targeted their OT and ICS systems. But these aren't the only systems that are targeted. CNI organizations also have their business networks, they have websites, they have broader IT infrastructure, and those too are all at risk of cyber attack. So preparation is key. And quite often, cyber incident response is pushed to the IT team as being one of their problems to plan for and respond to. But responding to a cyber incident isn't just IT's job. We need to look beyond that IT infrastructure to other teams, and that might be our leadership teams, communications teams, engineers working on the ground, even into parts of the business like HR and communications. So when we're thinking about how we plan and prepare for an attack, we're looking at that in a holistic way, not just focusing on the technical response. There's lots of challenges as well to implementing an effective incident response plan for cyber incidents. There's plenty of organizations out there that still don't have any kind of plan for cyber incident response. And so when something happens, they don't know what they're going to do and who's going to do it. There's a number of organizations that probably do have a plan in place, but they've written it, they've never updated it, and they've never practiced it. So when a real incident occurs, the plan isn't up to date and isn't relevant for the scenario that they find themselves in. Another challenge is having a plan, but then finding that that plan isn't accessible as a result of the cyber attack. So recently, there was a report into the SEPA ransomware attack, and that showed that they were unable to access their incident response plan for about 2 days during the incident. And then on top of all that, especially in organizations like organizations with multiple sites, there's a struggle to coordinate their actions across multiple teams in different parts of the business. So we've worked to develop a solution to help organizations meet some of these challenges and respond effectively and promptly to cybersecurity incidents. And I'm going to show you a little video and talk through how a platform like Orna can be used to support planning for incident response. So here we have Orna's main dashboard. And as you can see on the screen here, we can understand the incidents that we've got open at the moment. And we can see which of these are critical, which of them are low priority, and that lets organizations plan and prioritize their incident response. Obviously, we want to deal with the critical incidents first and leave the low priority ones till later. We've also got a breakdown of our incidents by type, and that's really useful for helping us to understand the threat landscape that we might be operating on. So we can see in this organization here that they've got a higher proportion of ransomware incidents. And that's information that organizations can use to share with other businesses in the same industry sector and start to get a feel for whether this is their behavior and their pattern, or it's something that we're seeing reflected across the industry sector. Also down here, we can see our incidents by month, and that gives us an idea of how our pattern of attacks might change over a period of time. So we can then start to correlate that with the activity that the rest of the wider business is undertaking. So it might be that we've taken on a new supplier and that changes our threat profile, or we've launched a new marketing campaign and brought on new customers, and that has in turn affected our threat profile. And I do apologize that my video has just frozen, which is not very helpful. So bear with me one moment, and I am going to switch to a different view so that you can see. So here we go. Apologies for that there. So we can also onboard a team, and we need to think ahead about our team and who we're going to have on our team, and then what role they're going to take and how they're going to respond to incidents. So here you can see that we've got our team onboarded in here, and we've got their contact details so that we know how we're going to be able to contact people and get in touch with them. And we can notify them through the platform, either via email or by phone. And we also need to define what role they're going to take in the incident response process. So here we've got some technical roles defined, like our CERT leader or our communications leader, our CERT member, but we've also got administrative roles like our HR representatives, our communications leaders, and our legal counsel. And you also might want to define roles and profiles for external support that you might call on in the event of a cyber incident. So that could be things like your managed security services provider or your third-party IT. The next thing we want to think about when we're thinking ahead and looking at incidents is the assets that we have on our network and how they might be impacted by an attack. So here we can see that this organization has a range of different assets, and we've thought about the criticality, and that helps us plan a prioritized recovery in the event of a cyber incident. So we can restore our critical systems first, get our services back up and running so that our consumers and end users down the line have the minimum degree of impact. The platform here also looks at which of our assets are being compromised most often. And that's helpful. And what we should always do is not look at each incident in isolation, but think about how patterns are evolving in the incidents that we face. And that helps inform our wider security strategy. So if we've got a particular asset that is being regularly targeted, then we might want to amend our security controls around those particular assets so that they're better defended. And here we start to get a feel for what kind of assets are being targeted. So it might be our data, our software, our hardware, our people, and particularly in CNI, things like our processes. So it might be a particular process that we undertake that we want to ensure is restored quickly. And we can select our types of asset and their asset criticality when we add them onto the system. The other thing that it's really useful to think about planning ahead when we're responding to cyber incidents is how we're going to communicate with people. And it's really helpful to think about templates for those in advance so that when an incident is actually happening, the majority of the text and what we're going to say to people is already written. We just need to customize it to that particular incident. So you can see here in the platform that we've got a number of different templates preloaded in. And should we have an incident, we can download one of those, customize it with the specific details of the event that we're dealing with, and get that sent out nice and promptly. And they've been approved in advance, and we know that the organization is happy with those communications. And now we're going to look at the incidents tab. As we can see, we've got one incident open here at the moment. But if we look to add a new incident, it's really important, again, when we're planning and thinking about incidents and when we're responding to them, to kind of record what we're doing and how we're doing it. So using a platform is a helpful way of making sure that everybody's on the same page. So I've talked a little bit, very briefly, about the fact that ransomware incidents have been used to target CNI organizations. So I'm going to put that kind of incident in. Let's imagine that I have got up this morning and found that that's affected my head office network. Now, as I start to go through and record what has been impacted, I can start to see that a number of these assets are coming up as red. So they're my high value assets. So I'm starting to get the feeling that I'm probably not going to have a good day today. And I'm going to record that maybe this was detected by my antivirus system. Now, in order to prioritize our incidents, hopefully we only have one running at a time, but that isn't always the case. So we can look at the urgency of response required for the incident and the impact of the incident and use that to determine the overall severity. And you can see as I select different buttons here, the severity is changing. So we need to pick somebody to lead the incident, and we should have a CERT leader or an incident response leader defined, and that's somebody for the business who is going to take responsibility and ownership of that incident. And it doesn't mean that they have to do every single task, but it means that somebody is there and aware of what's happening and is looking at the big picture and the overall impact on the organization. So I'm going to assign Martin here, and I'm going to create this incident. Martin's now got a notification and knows that he needs to log into the platform and take a look. And here is the incident view that he sees when he logs in. Now, as you can see, I can filter by different tasks and by different roles to get different views of this, but I'm going to look at all tasks for now. We can record notes, so an operator might be able to say that this is a ransomware attack, and they think maybe it was the result of phishing. And you can record free text in there. And then the platform here is using an incident response runbook. So we've planned ahead, we've thought about what tasks we'll need to provide and undertake, and they're all documented in here. And again, really important to get a good view of what's going to happen next. And ideally, we would rehearse this so that everybody knows exactly what is in each of these tasks. Now, this is specific to a ransomware incident. And when I click into a task that's assigned to me, I can see what it is that I need to do and what my expected outcomes are. I can record what I've been doing so that everybody else in the incident response team has a full picture of the incident, knows what's happening, and knows what actions have been taken. I can record my artifacts in here. So in this case, we talked about there being a phishing email. I could upload the email here so that we've got a good record of it. And then there's specific actions that I need to undertake in order to confirm that this task has been completed. And it's got some good descriptions in there of what to do, and I can work through and gradually tick those off. And then by using this Kanban style board, I can drag and drop incidents and say, yes, that one is in progress. That one has been done. And it's just flagged there that I haven't clicked the tasks inside the task as being done. So am I absolutely sure that I've completed the task? And as you can see, where we've got appropriate members of the team in place, the tasks have been assigned to them. And if we didn't have an appropriate member of the task in place, it comes up as unassigned, and I can go in and assign that to an appropriate person. So I'll take on that one. It works through the 6 stages of SANS incident response. So it goes through identification, containment, eradication, and each of those opens up as we need it, through to this prioritized recovery that I spoke about earlier, and also through to lessons learned. So one of the important things that we should do when we're thinking about incident response is not just look at an incident on its own, but look at it in terms of what did we learn from it? Once we closed it off, did we just file it away and forget about it? Or did we make changes to the organization so that we respond faster and more efficiently next time? And so we work through right down, as I scroll down here, to the lessons learned tab, and it takes us through some of the actions there. Now, in CNI, there might often be a responsibility to report attacks to a specific regulator or to members of the board. And so we want to be able to say, what did we do? How did we do it? And who was responsible for each of the actions? And in the heat of an incident, it can be quite difficult to have somebody taking notes and making sure that all these tasks have been checked off. So when an incident is tagged as completed, when we've completed all the tasks that are defined within these incident pages, then Honor allows us to generate a report to say exactly which actions have been taken. So that's my overview of Honor for you. Where we're hoping to go with this in the future, then integrate platforms with Honor to speed up that response and make it more cohesive and faster by linking in with security detection systems, so that as incidents are detected, then they will be transferred across into this platform and the response process can kick off straight away. As I've said, if we get to a point as an organization where we think this is more than we can deal with, then we can bring on our third parties into this platform and they can see exactly what's been done and pick up where we left off. So we're helping to organizations to plan for their incidents and then deduplicate any effort so that tasks are being undertaken, completed, and we're not going backwards a step to redo tasks because we've got a clear single pane of view of an incident as it evolves. Now, I'll just, apologies. I'm not going to try and switch back to my slides from there. But yes, we've got lots of exciting plans for Honor to develop this and help support organizations across all industry sectors, but specifically in CNI. And yes, apologies for the minor technical hitch, but if anybody has any questions, then I would be delighted to try and answer those.
Ellie, you're a consummate professional. Technology when you want it most. Oh gosh, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much. And do we have any questions coming in? I can't see anything on the live screen at the moment. But if you want to get hold of Ellie, then please do drop us a line at info@CyNam.org and we will fire any questions her way offline as well. Wembley Partners doing some fantastic things, and their platform there, obviously, really useful in the context of CNI at this moment in time, and you can check them out at wembleypartners.com as well. I'll say thank you, Ellie, and we're onwards to the next presentation. And it's my very great pleasure to be welcoming Patrick Goldsack, who is the CEO and co-founder of Configured Things. They're an exciting West Country tech startup who were founded in 2018 by HP Labs alumni who build solutions for large-scale distributed system management and security. Patrick will be talking about how strong configuration management can make CNI and smart cities better prepared in response to attacks and misconfiguration. Patrick, welcome.
Yeah,
thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Chris. So as Chris said, we're a small startup, about 3 to 4 years old, and we really were founded to try and look at the problems around distribution and federated systems as you get in sort of connected places and things like that, things where you don't have single owners and you need to collaborate and cooperate across boundaries, both at the data level and the control level in order to carry out what you need. So I'm just going to give it's a short talk looking at just one aspect of this problem, and that is, how do you write APIs? How do you define APIs that allow you to provide more level of control and certainty across the boundaries that we need? And in this, I'm going to just simply look at one instance of one service and one API, and how you might look at that from the perspective of securing it. So first thing, I'll just give you a little bit more information about the company. So as Chris said, we were founded in 2018, mostly out of HP Labs, all of us though from HP. And we have a background in research in security, privacy, configuration systems, IoT, everything you might expect. I mean, the IT comes really from the time when HP was a measurement company rather than a computer company. So we're going back to the 90s for that. But nevertheless, it is IoT. And we were looking at how to build really big IoT systems. About 3 months after we founded, we actually applied to join the third cohort of the NCSC Cyber Accelerator, and I suspect we still hold the record for the least mature company to ever be accepted on that. But we have seriously benefited from being so. We were sort of deeply involved in the CheltenHam cyber ecosystem generally, and we're very grateful to the people who sort of listened to our pitch to join, having the shall we say, the imagination to imagine what it might be rather than actually what it was at the time. So very, very, very grateful for that. And so having given you that sort of very brief introduction, I'll just sort of dive in. One thing I should say about the company is, since we come out of kind of an industrial research background, we do have a slight tendency to think about interesting problems rather than laser focus on some products and so on. So something which isn't that, shall we say, where investors aren't necessarily keen, that doesn't have a bottom line. So we are trying now to sort of develop more products. And what you'll find is that, at the end, I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing, but we are still, I would say, pre-revenue in the sense of product revenue. We very much are on the sort of doing POCs and that kind of thing, but not yet on the product side. So I'm not really trying to sell you anything here. Okay, so looking at the problem that we're going to talk about a little bit, is the boundary really around, let's say, a piece of IoT, bit of sort of critical national infrastructure, if you want, or some service in a smart city, a connected place. And you can break that down into various different areas. There's the kind of data that comes in and out of those, and the sort of data flows out. Might be measurements, there might be CCTV feeds, there might be things of that kind. There might be flows in, for example, to put on screens, other data to meld with the data that you're picking up out of your own infrastructure. I'm not really going to talk about that and how to deal with those. They get configured up by the rest, but that is not an aspect I'm going to talk about today. Apart from that, you've got these two sort of different areas. One is the sort of configuration management side, and configuration is important from the perspective of getting something secure. A lot of the failures of security come around the failures in configuration, accidentally leaving firewalls rule in the wrong state, or so on. And the other side then is the APIs that you're going to provide for people to interact with the system. And they're actually not that different. I mean, in the end, they all come down to managing state, defining state, and changes to state of the system that you're dealing with. Be it configuration management, be it the APIs. They're just done in different ways. Configuration tends to be done by administrators logging in, changing things, using shells, maybe automating things with tools such as Ansible, Puppet, Chef, and so on. There are plenty of those around. And the operational interfaces tend to be APIs, be they RESTful, be they web pages on a web server served by effectively the underlying system. So they've got very different mechanisms that tend to be used from. Ultimately, what they're doing is changing the state of the system. But if you have a relatively disorganized way of doing these things, so for example, sort of the admin using the shell, it's very actually hard to ask yourself and answer the question about what is the state, what changes can I make, how do I know how to sort of combine conflicting state change requirements from different places. It's actually just the questions don't just don't come up. You need to think about the interface and the way in which your system works in a way that encourages you to think about these problems and solve them as you're going forward. So from a slightly different perspective, I mean, we do a lot of, in our work, we do a lot of kind of threat analyses and so on. And this is just a really very high sort of scheme of just 2 or 3 areas, but they've been chosen to sort of highlight certain things. And so bear with me on that. So as I said, the incorrect configuration is a major source of vulnerabilities. And the question then comes down into, you know, how do you rely less on people just simply doing the right thing in terms of the administrator work? How do you, how do you actually audit or monitor what's happening at that point? How do you know and validate after the event when something's happened as to what went wrong and how it all worked? It's far better if you could sort of start thinking clearly about what it is you're configuring, what the state is, how to define it, and how to change that in some declarative way rather than doing procedural actions. It's much better to audit that. It's much better to track that. And so what we try and do is look at how do we sort of orchestrate systems by providing state models, how to sort of present these as documents at the interface rather than having someone sort of type in commands or even automating things with some of the sort of script execution engines such as Ansible. From the operational perspective and the APIs, if they get we've seen APIs which have maybe 50, 100 method calls, all of which do fairly basic things, and where the main way of sort of authenticating yourself to the system for doing that is maybe a sort of tokens across a REST interface. You're trying to guess from the perspective of the automation side, the back end of this, as to where that set of sequence of calls is going to understand whether or not it's allowed to happen. And very often there may be more than one destination for these, some of which are allowed, some of which aren't, and you don't actually know at the start where that destination is going. So you have to allow the processes so far and then halfway through sort of block it. It's just really hard to manage systems of that kind. So again, the way we try to think about these APIs is as requests for state change. State may be this time described in a way that you are allowed to view it, not in the way in which the underlying system actually automates things. And that allows us to be much more abstract about what we allow people to do and much easier to track and trace what it is they do and audit that process. And the last thing is that many of the problems come from people making mistakes through, because they've been conned into making something, this sort of spear phishing type things. People are very sophisticated at that these days. And administrators can be, if they have the wrong level of access to the underlying system, may accidentally and without realizing it actually install malware or something of that kind. Or you also get the problem of, a disgruntled insider or sort of wanting to cause problems. So how can you stop these sorts of things happening when a single actor accidentally or deliberately tries to do something? And so one thing we've been looking at is how do we make sure that we have multiple sign-off for actions, sort of chain of command, administrator, senior architect, and what have you, all agreeing as to what the right changes are, and making sure that that is checked by the system that's being configured and managed to ensure that these things are correct. And this is something that's standard in coding practice for the moment. Sort of if you're writing code, you check it into your configuration, your sort of the code databases which hold the various configurations of the code, and you ask other people to check through the code before it actually goes into the mainstream code repository. So-called pull requests. So why is that not done as part of the standard process for managing the configuration or interaction with a system? And it's inherently much simpler to do that sort of thing with a document than it is with a sort of interactive transaction, sort of interface with something, where you can have a document, you can get many people to look at it, you can get them to sign off whatever piece of that document they need to sign off, and then that can be checked on receipt by the system to act upon. Whereas much harder if actually your entire security model is provided by this sort of interconnection you have with the underlying system. So models of this kind actually have some significant improvements in the way in which you can interact and build your systems. One of them is these things are inherently idempotent. It doesn't matter if you say, I want this twice. Okay, so think of this as a remote control where you've got power toggle or on and off. You can press on as many times as you like. It doesn't matter. It is on. And if you press off many times, it doesn't matter. It's off. But if you press power toggle many times, you'll be up and down all over the place. So if you can build your systems that are idempotent, so it doesn't matter if you say things twice, it allows you to recover much more easily. It allows you to keep the whole system in the state you want, rather than not knowing where you've got to when something appeared to fail. This is a statement of what you want, and you can repeat that. It doesn't matter. And that means if you get disconnected, reconnected, you can recover by simply resubmitting what it is you want. And it doesn't matter if it actually was just a temporary disconnection. And so the other thing is these documents are much higher level than they are than the low level APIs tend to be. So it's a much better level at which to log and much better level at which to trace what's happening under the underlying system. And so if you look at that boundary point, that gateway, that where the models come in, it is all about someone presenting what they want and getting back in the language in which they're allowed to talk about, if you wish, and getting back the sort of the current state in that viewpoint as to whether or not that's been achieved or what's gone wrong if it hasn't been achieved and so on. So at that gateway, we can now talk about, how is the processing of these models different when you take this approach versus, for example, using a normal RESTful API? Well, they are documents, okay? They're documents that can be protected by signing. They're documents that can be protected by encryption. And so actually a lot of the security of that is already provided just in that nature of the document and not so much in the nature of the communication with it. So the gateway can actually pull stuff into it from relatively, if necessary, untrusted environments. It matters much less what those environments are than it would be if that communication, that security of the point-to-point link was actually there. So as it comes in, it can be decrypted if it's encrypted because it's holding secrets or there's some privacy implication with it. It's checked, for example, for things like replay attacks. One of the things with signed documents is that someone can take a copy of it and resubmit it. It can then go through authorization policies, looking at the signing and and who has authorized these particular actions and whether they've got the right to do so. It can go through a kind of schema checking, the well-formedness of it. Are they talking about things that are within their scope? Are they requesting data aspects? For example, that's, if there's some number which is maybe a threshold or something of that kind, is that within the bounds that they're allowed to talk about? And then finally, the things gets transformed into the models that's then used inside for the automation process. This gateway provides a lot of capabilities in terms of the the way in which you provide security at that boundary. And the very fact you're dealing with models and the very fact you're dealing with the declarative statements of things just gives you this much better audit model that comes out of the side, which allows you to do both detection of breach as well as validating or understanding why things have gone wrong in the first place. So as a little example, the one we use fairly frequently from a smart city perspective is the notion of street lights is something that's very easy to understand. So you have lights these days, LED lights. They're all in the streets. They're all individually addressable. They can all be switched on and off remotely. They could be given maybe a brightness, maybe a color or something of that kind. So, you know, from the perspective of the light, if it's not connected to anything and it's dark, it goes on. Okay. And if it's light, it goes off, because that's the sort of natural safe state fallback position of the system. And by the council, maybe if they're connected up to it and can control it, might say, well, I'm going to have it off unless it needs to be on by someone else's request. And really, it's just a service, and now people can request different ways of asking for these, for this to be controlled. So you have things like, for example, the police. The police have access to crime and accident statistics. They can say these areas need to be lit. And so they can submit some request for very particular street lights or particular areas to be turned on, in which case the council would take that as one of the state requests, one of the configurations requests across that boundary. And the police have a particular API for this particular model they can cope with, maybe down to the street light, being able to say, you know, what level they want it. However, a school might want an event between 4 and 7 on a Tuesday, with kids going to and from. So they simply say they have that. That's a different sort of model across that boundary, but that gets turned by the council into, let's say, a 2-kilometer radius for, whose lights then have to come on. And then there are other things. Utility might be digging the street, might want the approach lights, the lights in the approaches to be lit, and maybe the ones over the top of the dig in the road lit red as an indication to the thing. So you can see these different organizations all have different models, and they all speak only in the terminology of their model, and it all gets turned and checked and validated and turned into the underlying state, which is which lights come on, which lights are off. Okay, so coming back to the company and what it's doing, it's not yet got any real products in this space. And I've only talked about one small part of it, which is the way in which we're thinking of building the APIs, and we do, and that we build the APIs. And so the main thing we're building is a platform that enables such things to be built relatively straightforwardly. There's a modeling language, distributed runtimes, components for things like the gateway and model management, the back end, and orchestration and automation, handing off to things like Ansible for orchestrating some of the things. It's robust and complete enough right now for ourselves to use in particular things. It's not yet something which we can hand out freely. We haven't got all the documentation we need, the worked examples, support infrastructures, and everything else you'd need to turn this into a product, even if it's open source. And so that is something we're discussing, but it's a lot of work to get there. But, you know, if someone's interested perhaps in playing around with it and coming back to us and sort of saying, you know, giving their opinions and maybe using it for some small projects themselves, and you're willing to accept the problems of working with something quite at that bleeding edge, then we'd be happy to talk to you. We also do lots of proof of consultancy, proof of concepts, consulting and such like. And we are currently actually working on a few specific products, one of which is the sort of LoRaWAN, hardened LoRaWAN system, which we see as potentially sort of the next generation SCADA, and some other stuff around the signage world. So if you want to get in touch, please contact us here. And that's my time up, I believe.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Fantastic. And again, we will share those contact details for Patrick with anybody that's interested. You've put yourself in it there, Patrick. You said if anybody wants to have a play around with our platform, that'd be great. So if anybody does, then please do get in touch, and we will obviously put you in touch directly with Patrick as well. info@CyNam.org. But we're going to speed onwards to our last presentation for the afternoon, welcoming Keith Driver, who's the CTO of Titania, and has a long history in the cybersecurity industry, building products and capabilities to protect commercial, government, and CNI organizations. Titania is a 12-year-old SME, although I'd say they're very much more on the medium than the small side these days, in Worcester, building cybersecurity tools to aid the identification and elimination of risk in core network devices, security and compliance, delivering tools for penetration testing and the enterprise. Titania is at the forefront of audit automation. And Keith will cover how risk in CNI networks can be identified and managed as part of a holistic cybersecurity posture. He may also have time to do a live demo at the end, which would be Fantastic. So welcome, Keith. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Chris. Now, let's get the slides. Thank you ever so much. Okay, as Chris said, I'm CTO of Titania here in Worcester, and as Chris alludes to, we're a well-established company, over 12 years now, providing desktop tools, laptop tools to the penetration test industry. And those tools have been used predominantly in the United States, as it turns out. And they have an interestingly different view of cybersecurity to the way that the UK organises itself. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So we've been busy developing our products and expanding them to address the scale of the challenge, particularly in US networks, which tend to be very large. So if we talk about cybersecurity and the critical national infrastructure, as I'm sure we're all aware, this is an incredibly complex landscape that we have to all address. And it's also one that was largely, an industry that was largely present before we had to think very much about cybersecurity. So CNI is a many-headed beast, and by that I mean that the industries that participate or are designated as critical national infrastructure have such a wide variety of IT systems from different ages, have such a wide variety of OT systems, operational technology systems, that they have deployed and had out in the field for decades, that the advent of cyber attacks, the threat that has suddenly emerged on their perimeters and within their boundaries has somewhat caught them on the hop. Now, of course, this has been going on for a decade or more, so I'm somewhat cartooning it. But the pace of change in critical national infrastructure is so slow because of several reasons. It means that in large part they can still be vulnerable to many cyber attack vectors. So the critical national infrastructure market space is in the UK owned, or at least was in 2011, I don't think it's changed at all, owned by 80% of it is owned by private organizations and only 20% of it by government organizations. And so essentially what we're saying is here we have to persuade private companies to act on behalf of our national interest and protect the assets as if they were owned by government. And of course, companies only work on an investment and return on investment basis and by regulation. And so it's a tough challenge for the government to bring about a set of criteria and motivations that mean that they're forced, if you like, through one mean or another to protect the infrastructure and make sure that our critical national infrastructure is available when we need it. Okay, let me go there. Okay, so what is the threat to critical national infrastructure? And as Ellie noted earlier, there's a wide range of headline attacks that we've all become aware of. There will be many more that haven't made it to the press, where they've been dealt with or they've been defended, or we just haven't got to find out about them. But there are many different types of attack, and they affect different parts of the infrastructure. So the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack shut down the pipeline. It didn't actually shut the pipeline down. The interesting thing about that one was it was an attack on an IT system rather than an OT system. So contrary to perhaps popular belief, the pipeline itself was shut down by the company itself in protection of its own business. So it was a fairly hefty attack on the Colonial Pipeline's IT systems as ransomware, but it had the effect of shutting down all of their operational technology, and therefore the pipeline did deliver the fuel to the customers. T-Mobile US was a completely different one. That was the exposure of a router to the public internet. As far as we know, there's a little bit of public information about that one, but that resulted in a lot of personal information being breached, something like 50 million different records. And of course, telecommunications is absolutely part of critical national infrastructure. The SolarWinds attack, again, is really interesting because it came in completely differently as a completely different vector, probably a state-sponsored attack where they infiltrated the SolarWinds source code. The SolarWinds product was properly signed and delivered to all of their customers as an update. It was a sophisticated piece of business logic in the implant, in that it slept for quite some time, I believe about a fortnight. So it got through all the sandboxing and the proper procedures that companies and organizations have to protect themselves against such supply chain attacks. And only when it was installed on real networks did it become alive and start then pivoting through the networks. And to this day, there is a lot of unknowns about what the impact of that SolarWinds attack was, but it will have been used across critical national infrastructure. SolarWinds is a very good product, and it has a wide deployed base. That one very worrying. And for a completely different part of critical national infrastructure, you may have been aware that the Irish Health Service, HSE, were more or less shut down for 2 months last year. Something like it took 2 months to recover 80% of their systems from a ransomware attack. And they were absolutely adamant that they were not going to pay any ransomware attacks. So it completely a huge business disruption. You might be able to measure that in money, but really you're measuring it in lives. OT attacks do occur, of course, and we're all aware of the Stuxnet famous attack, but it is somewhat harder to attack OT unless you know where it is and what it is. So it's a bit like application development. Most developers develop their applications to work on iOS or on Android if you're targeting mobiles, but not many will still target Blackberries. And you can have parallels that OT are really like Blackberries in that they are different technology, and the attacks that you would apply to Android and iOS won't work. But on the other side, they're very poorly protected, and that's where the BlackBerry analogy falls down, because they had some very good security and were used throughout government circles to secure comms. But lots of OT is not protected very well at all, and so it's very vulnerable. Okay, let me move across. It's not my cursor key. There we go. So what can you see in terms of critical national infrastructure across the internet? You can find quite a lot of things that are either ostensibly there just as ancillary capabilities, things like CCTV or temperature sensors, that kind of thing, or people and organizations have actually exposed some of their ICS equipment to the internet. And you can use tools like Shodan to go and find them. Shodan's just a database on the internet which scans the internet looking for things that are exposed, tries to identify what they are, and then gives you a searchable list of those things. So it's a very interesting and very very worrying list of things that anybody can go and attack. The example screenshot I put there is of some Siemens industrial equipment. Actually, it's part of I believe that one was University of Maryland's honeypot set. So it's not actually exposed equipment in the sense that it's vulnerable. It's there to try and research what people try to attack. Okay. Who are the people that are attacking us? So it's the list of usual suspects, I think, is what everybody would say. It is assumed to be nation states or state-sponsored organizations, maybe with plausible deniability. Either way, states are involved because some of the attacks require incredible resources to achieve them. Motivated, well-resourced organised crime, though, is I think a lot of the most publicised variants. And in the case of the Colonial Pipeline, that seems to have been an organised crime origin. And in that case, Colonial paid somewhere between $4.4 million and $5 million as ransomware to free up their business. And I don't think, although the Irish Health Service were adamant that they were not going to pay ransomware, I think that a lot of people pay their way out of this just to get their businesses back up and running. So it does pay to invest in defence to try to prevent these things from happening. I would urge personally a no ransom paying policy, but that's a matter for each individual organisation. So the problem is a global issue. Now, this spans national boundaries. So, of course, we want to protect our UK national infrastructure, and we've got very close links with our colleagues in Europe, and we have lots of energy links, specifically across borders that inextricably link us all. And so working under legislation like the Nist directive that was adopted into UK law in 2018 really helps us bring a legal framework and a compelling reason why CNI should be protected and how it should be protected. And our NCSC provides advice and tools that help with this. In the USA, they're a bit more prescriptive about exactly what should be done, and they have everything from presidential policy directives to directives that come from defence or from the various sectors of the critical national infrastructure about how they would like to protect their infrastructure. But their mechanisms for doing so tend to be very prescriptive under, for instance, Nist standards, 853, 800, 171, 853, which is there to apply to government networks for government-owned critical national infrastructure, and 171 in the federal space for privately owned but nonetheless federal interested parties' infrastructure. And the checks and controls that are offered by Nist are quite prescriptive and allow you to build some automation tools against them. And that's where Titania has been really very successful in auditing US networks according to these risk management frameworks and security standards defined in the US. Oh, apologies, that slide didn't work so well. So, how do you combat the attacks? So, I'm not going to repeat the oft presented cybersecurity paradigms, but it is about layered defense, but not in the old sense. So previously, we all believed that perimeter defenses were sufficient to prevent people gaining access to our network. And whilst layered defense is still really important and protecting your perimeter is vital, we can no longer assume that people will not penetrate that surface. And we have to assume that we have to have a combined defense where all of the protections inside a network and outside work in concert to frustrate and impede any intrusions. And a lot of that means that we've got to reorganize our cybersecurity posture and to link systems together and build sensor networks that work across the whole of the network, not just against the perimeter devices. And so, like most things, you've got to understand your landscape, get organized, and make some assumptions that you will not always be successful in any one of the endeavors that you have in place to prevent either intrusion or spread. And so there's a number of different versions of what's called zero trust architecture. It's not a new paradigm, but it has become more prevalent as a paradigm for helping to protect networks. And helpfully, NCSC, DISA, and Nist have all published reference architectures for zero trust recently. And I would encourage you to look at the principles of what they offer. So, as with all things, Occam's razor wins most times. Keeping it simple means that you understand what you're doing and you get great outcomes. And I'm a strong supporter of the NCSC's view that simple cyber hygiene will defeat the majority of cyber attacks. And the 10 steps to cybersecurity and Cyber Essentials Plus offered by our own NCSC are incredibly effective. And any organization should look to those as the first instance. Because for critical national infrastructure, you need to be a bit more sophisticated and apply more sophisticated monitoring and tools to keep up to date. And zero trust, again, speaks of knowing where your assets are, understanding what their configuration is, and understanding what vulnerabilities they might have to external threats. So managing all that information is really important, and understanding whether your equipment is actually vulnerable to any of the attacks. So attacks can come in two flavors. They can come in the ones that are known to occur in particular firmware versions. So here I'm talking about core network equipment. It's it's the software that's embedded in things like firewalls, routers, and switches. And it's just software, albeit embedded within the device, but it can have weaknesses. People find the weaknesses and publish them in databases. And so if you know what the version of the firmware is, you know what weaknesses that you're exposed to. Misconfigurations, though, are the configuration files and strategies within a device. It's nothing to do with the software per se, it's the way in which the software is configured to run. And they can create a great deal of problems, and configuration can cause a whole lot of angst and allow people through firewalls, misroute packets, or with weak passwords and credentials allow changes to those devices. So how do you protect against them? Traditionally, what happened is that penetration testers would use tools like Titania's Nipper and sample devices, because they can't get through every device. It's a complex process, penetration testing a device. So by selecting a few and testing them, you get an idea of how vulnerable your network is. But that's no longer really good enough. You must be auditing every device every day in order to know that your network's protected, particularly if you believe that your network has been compromised, and make that assumption as part of zero trust. So continuous audit is the key to having confidence and configuration confidence. And as network managers work every day, they are implementing services and they're changing services and they're adding services. And that introduces something called configuration drift, which means that the changes that they make might have unintended consequences. So by auditing every day, you are detecting things that are wrong in the network, and that means that you have a chance of repairing them faster and having the vulnerability or the misconfiguration around in your network for less time. So the standards bodies have recognized this. So CDM in the US is a federal standard for cybersecurity, and they've started to say that you must audit your devices every 72 hours. PCI DSS that's coming out soon, that's starting to talk about continuous configuration management as of version 4, which will be released in 2022. So all the standards bodies are starting to recognize that continuous audit is what's needed, as well as penetration auditing. And Titania provide two products to cover those two eventualities. Nipper is our long-standing product, and Nipper Enterprise encapsulates the Nipper product, horizontally scales it, and then schedules audits across your network. The audits produce a large amount of data, but that can be summarized in a SIM system, what SIM systems do is gather security data and allow you to have various views on it. This slide here shows how we have aggregated our security data that we produce and provided a risk lens on configuration errors and network vulnerabilities that we found in the network devices. So this one happens to be Nist 853, so a US standard, often used in the military here though as well. And on the right-hand side, you'll get some totals of any infractions that there are against those various control families in 853. But you'll see in the middle, there's a color-coded risk matrix, which makes it really easy to decide which ones you should go for first. And I think that we've run out of time for demo, so I won't jump to demo, Chris. So having done that, I'll leave it there.
Fantastic, Keith. Thank you so much. Sorry, yeah, we've covered so much ground today. It's absolutely fascinating, and CNI is such a big topic in the cybersecurity side of things. And I mean, we could just do something around zero tolerance approaches to cybersecurity, and we can do that next year. So let's wrap from here. I want to thank everybody for coming today, for being a part of today's show. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to be introduced to any of the presenting companies or people, please do get in touch with us, info@cynam.org. If you would like to participate in the future and be a part of our tech showcases, please also do get in touch with us. We have plenty more coming in 2022. Let us know your thoughts as well. Your feedback is absolutely critical so that we are continuing to push out the right kind of content for the community. Twitter, CyNam, Hub, and obviously on LinkedIn as well. All it remains is for me to say thank you so much for our wonderful 3 presenters today. Thank you to you for coming and being a part of today's CyNam event. Thank you very much and goodbye.